This is a video in response to a video that discusses a few chapters of this book, Truth in Translation by BeDuhn. You'll see this book many times in my New World Translation Curiosity videos. This book gives high reviews of the New World Translation. Naturally, it gets attacked by others, just as they do us. Here we see kindly gentlemen in this video that offer some of their Greek and Trinitarian thoughts. My intent is to be most respectful and kindly in these comments as well. At the start, Mark Ward allows his guest Daryl Burling a few moments to offer his credentials.
Yeah, so I did my undergraduate and master's degree. I did my undergraduate at the Masters University in Biblical Counseling and my master's degree, Master of Divinity, training to be a pastor initially.
But sadly, of Jason BeDuhn's credentials,
and, checks off all the academic boxes.
Checks off all the academic boxes. Bummer. To be fair, here are some pretty hefty boxes to check. Not surprisingly, there are many Greek scholars that disagree among themselves. It's a matter of discerning which scholars or which specific points we see that best aligns harmoniously with the Bible, and without putting the people down. There are knowledgeable scholars that fall all across the biblical spectrum. What is helpful in knowing their credentials is having an understanding of where these individuals have learned. Have they studied in Catholic seminaries, Lutheran or Baptist colleges, synagogues, Brigham Young, and so forth? Even the most conscientious people will still speak biasly, if unintentionally, so it's always good to get an idea of where they're coming from. So there are three topics discussed in this video: worship, the Granville Sharp rule, and of course, John 1:1c, the Word was a God. All three of these topics have already been detailed in YouTube videos that I've made. The links for those videos are listed in the comment section below. As far as worship, we're quite agreeable on it. King James uses worship in connection with people worshiping other people. In the days of the King James Bible, worship included bowing down, a bending of the knee to people, in addition to godly, sacred, divine worship. Today, worship is seen as exclusively godly, sacred worship, and no longer as a simple bowing down, genuflecting.
Right. And I think BeDuhn does a very good job of just sort of saying, this is not a valid way of translating proskuneo. This word should probably be, he bowed down before him. He paid him honor. He paid his respects to him by bowing down. Something along those lines.
Both Mark Ward and Daryl disagree with BeDuhn, Moises Silva, and myself on the rather subjective understanding of the wise men, either bowing down or worshiping baby Jesus, in Matthew 2, verse 11. The link to my detailed video on worship will explain all of that down below. Moving on to Granville Sharp rule, we quite agree on that as well, although we differ on how it should be applied.
What BeDuhn does is he goes off and he says, well, God is used as a proper name in the New Testament. And unfortunately, he doesn't provide any examples.
God isn't a name. Not providing examples in one book doesn't mean there aren't any examples. Of course, we know Jehovah is God's name, but for just a few examples, when King David pleads in Psalm 43, verse 4, "O God, my God," can we really insist David is merely addressing God with a title, not a name? At James 4, verse 8, "Draw near to God." Isn't this a lot more intimate than just to say, "Draw near to the true God," or a common noun? How many dozens or hundreds of times have we asked people, "What's God's name?" And they reply, "God." Okay, how many people do we meet that still avoids the expression, "Oh my God," because it blasphemes God's name? Yes, I respectfully disagree with Daryl's thought of God not being a name, but they're forced to say God can't be a name, because if it is, it throws one more monkey wrench into the Granville Sharp rule. As far as the Granville Sharp rule, there are simply way too many variables, stipulations, and exceptions to put too much stock in it. There are many standard Orthodox Greek scholars that are at least skeptical of the Granville-Sharp rule, on down to not accepting it at all. It does seem the Granville-Sharp rule does have some merit though, but then so does the rule, when two vowels go walking, the first one does the talking. But that rule's also easy to break. Or is it break? Note this comment.
The final court of appeal is the Hebrew and Greek. And when you have a Jehovah's Witness or somebody supporting them who's arguing against the deity of Christ by appealing to difficult Greek grammatical categories, somebody's got to do the work to evaluate whether this argument is true.
Yes, there are difficult Greek and grammatical categories. Just two responses on this that many Trinitarians don't always seem to realize. One of the reasons for much of the said difficult Greek and grammatical categories is because of applying a Trinitarian slant to otherwise clear Greek and grammatical categories. Thus can create or build up difficult Greek and grammatical categories. There may be not as many difficult Greek and grammatical categories when not wedging in a Trinitarian triangle. We see examples of this continuously. Secondly, Jehovah's Witnesses do have scholars equally as scholarly, trained and informed as these and other scholars, especially nowadays, a fact often overlooked. Throughout the video, Mark Ward and Darrell Burling emphasized the importance of reading various books on the Trinity and even offered book recommendations, which reminded me of once what I was advised years back. A friend had told me that the reason I changed my mind on the Trinity was because I haven't learned enough about it in the first place, which that much isn't true. Well, he did end up saying a little more than he bargained for. Why should I have to firm up a strong Trinitarian a priori first, and then read and interpret the Bible through a Trinitarian lens? Not only that
Early church fathers had to really give themselves to this. And they're the ones who bequeath to us a lot of the most careful understanding of Christology and of the Trinity. That means there's going to be some kind of main line of lowercase o orthodoxy that I can appeal to.
Yes, we hear again the bringing up of uninspired founding church fathers and orthodoxy to appeal to. Catholics say anyone following the founding church fathers' orthodox ways would still be Catholic. And some non-Catholics ask, if you're going to shave off Orthodox and Catholic ways, why doesn't that include their Trinity? Well, why not simply start with a clean slate and appeal to just the inspired scriptures? God created his only begotten Spirit Son, who was used as mediator to create everything else. How many scholars are needed for that? How many Orthodox secular books are required? How strong of an a priori need one build? How many founding church fathers? How many grammatical rules and predicate nominatives do we have to have? Where's the difficult Greek? God created a Spirit Son that was used to create everything else. Even the plowboy gets that. Anyway, moving on to their final topic, John 1:1c, the Word was God, or a God. To be brief, a lot of what's said in the video on John 1:1c is very standard thinking and comments that we hear frequently.
The use of the Greek article is intended to point to something, but the reason for that pointing does not necessarily require that something be definite.
Tell that to numerous scholars that push for Cowell's rule. Video for that in the link below. It isn't unusual for us to hear explanations on predicate nominative.
A predicate nominative expresses a nominative, nominative verb, or nominative verb, nominative, or something like that. So rather than an accusative, you've got another nominative sitting there as the predicate, the object of the verb, so to speak. So predicate nominatives, they are reasonably, well, they're not that complex really, but the rules around it aren't as well understood as what they probably should be. They're not that clear.
Got that. I do have to admit he may have done better if he would have used notes, an outline, or even a teleprompter. But not that any of all that really even matters. We can go much simpler on the scriptural thoughts. For one, Wayne Grudem made an excellent point in his book Systematic Theology on page 276. If John had wanted to say the Word was a God, it would have been written this way. There it is, Scripture alone. How can that be any simpler? No unnecessary, verbose, grammatical baggage, just straightforward, simple statement. Why aren't more Greek scholars pointing out that most elementary, basic fact, at least in their footnotes, as Robert Young did, or as we see in other translations mentioned in the history of John 1:1c video, also here on YouTube. Additionally, there's a second clear and most important point using just the scriptures. Please keep this in mind. The majority of Greek scholars will profess John 1:1c is qualitative, meaning the word Jesus has qualities of God and is not identifying Jesus or saying who he is. In this scripture, John's point is that Jesus has qualities of God or a God. Just look at how countless Greek scholars in their translations translate God calling judges God. They translate God calling human kings God. They translate God calling angels God. They translate Jesus calling people gods. This isn't polytheism or Mormon-type gods. Ultimately, it's God himself calling others God to show that they have godlike power, authority, or other godly qualities. Incidentally, do we ever hear of Greek scholars scrutinizing and dissecting any of these scriptures that call individuals God? Do they analyze verbs and arthros nouns, predicate nominatives, find difficult Greek, and tack on grammar rules to these verses? Yet these same scholars insist you daresn't translate the God-inspired Apostle John to call Jesus God in a qualitative way, the very qualitative way these scriptures and scholars preach. Yes, if God's Holy Spirit indeed moved the Apostle John to say Jesus has qualities of God, well, why aren't Greek scholars correctly translating it that way to draw that point clear? How often do people read John 1:1c and conclude Jesus has qualities of God? Virtually everyone we speak to all say, this is identifying Jesus. He is God. But even according to Greek scholars, that identifying isn't the inspired message of God. Interestingly, John 1:1c in the New World Translation applies God's idea of using the word God to indicate Jesus has godlike qualities, exactly in line with what other Greek scholars teach is John's message. Qualitative. Yet those very scholars still dismiss the New World Translation.
I think you can and should trust all of the English translations practically that exist outside the sectarian New World Translation.
There you have it. The New World Translation can't say Jesus is a God, but the same understanding other mainstream Bibles can say lesser judges, kings, angels, and other people are gods having godly qualities. Why the double standard?